A Mustang horse, once majestic and free, found itself chained and forsaken in the desolate wilderness. With the forest's shadows lengthening and predators closing in, it seemed his fate was sealed. But what unfolded next would redefine resilience, courage, and the power of hope. When the world abandoned him, this horse fought back, against nature, against despair, and against the betrayal of a man he once trusted. This is a story of survival that will leave you speechless. Before diving in, make sure to subscribe to our channel, like this video, and turn on notifications to support more incredible stories like this. In the dense, brooding forests of Montana, the sun dipped behind towering pines, casting jagged shadows across the land. A once proud Mustang, his spirit broken and body frail, lay trembling amidst the underbrush. His name was Dust, and in this moment, hope seemed a distant dream. Dust had been abandoned by the one human he trusted, a farmer who had grown weary of the horse's illness and decided to leave him to his fate. When Dust's health began to falter, the farmer, unwilling to shoulder the burden of care, made a heartless choice. Deep within the forest, he chained Dust to a weathered tree, leaving him to perish. This forest, once a symbol of freedom, became Dust's prison. The chains bit into his skin, and every breath he drew was a struggle. His body ached, not just from the sickness that ravaged him, but from the cruel restraint that denied him even the comfort of movement. But Dust wasn't entirely alone. The forest was alive with sounds, the rustling of leaves, the melodic chirping of distant birds, and, more ominously, the guttural growls of predators. Weak and exhausted, Dust lifted his head one final time, his dark eyes scanning the wilderness for a miracle. None came. Instead, the air grew heavy with the scent of danger. A grizzly bear, its powerful muscles rippling beneath a coat of thick fur, emerged from the shadows. It had caught Dust's scent and moved closer, driven by hunger. Dust's frail body was incapable of flight, his chains a cruel reminder of his captivity. The bear's eyes glistened with predatory intent as it edged nearer, its heavy paws crunching the undergrowth. This was a battle Dust couldn't win. Just as the bear prepared to strike, the forest's eerie stillness shattered. "Hey! Get away from him!" A voice, sharp and commanding, cut through the tension. Dust's ears flicked at the sound, a faint flicker of recognition piercing his despair. Emerging from the shadows was Clara, a woman small in stature but immense in determination. Clara had once volunteered on the farm where Dust lived. She had cared for the horses and formed a quiet bond with the Mustang. When she heard rumors of Dust's sudden disappearance, her instincts told her something was amiss. Following her heart, she ventured into the wilderness, driven by an unshakable sense of urgency. Her heart pounded as she approached the bear. Raising her arms and shouting, she tried to make herself appear larger. The bear hesitated, torn between hunger and the perceived threat. Clara stood her ground, her eyes locking briefly with Dust's. In his gaze, she saw more than pain, she saw a plea for help. The bear growled again but, sensing the challenge, retreated into the shadows. Clara rushed to Dust's side, her hands trembling as she fumbled with the chains. Dust's body was motionless, his spirit almost extinguished, yet as Clara worked, she whispered soothing words. "You're safe now," she murmured, her voice steady despite her racing heart. At last, the chains fell away, clattering to the forest floor. Dust, though barely conscious, managed to nuzzle Clara's hand, a fragile gesture of gratitude. Clara knew the battle was far from over. Dust's body was frail, and time was running out. She wrapped a rope gently around his neck and whispered, "I've got you now. You're not alone anymore." Her voice carried a resolve Dust could feel, even in his weakened state. Their bond, forged in the crucible of survival, would now be tested further. To save Dust, Clara needed to get him to safety. The nearest veterinary clinic was miles away, and the journey through the rugged forest would test both their limits. Every step was a struggle. Dust stumbled often, his legs trembling beneath him. Clara's heart ached, but she refused to give in to despair. The forest's once inviting trails now felt like a labyrinth of danger. The path was uneven, the underbrush dense. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it a chill that bit into Clara's resolve. But she pressed on, her determination fueled by the faint glimmer of hope in Dust's dark eyes. As the hours dragged on, exhaustion weighed heavily on Clara. Dust's suffering mirrored her own, but she couldn't afford to stop. When Dust stumbled again, Clara knelt beside him, resting a hand on his shoulder. "You're strong," she whispered, her voice tinged with emotion. "I know you're strong." Dust's ears flicked at her words, and he lifted his head slightly. It was a small gesture, but it reignited Clara's hope. Together, they would face whatever lay ahead. Dust barely stood, his legs trembling beneath the weight of exhaustion and illness. Yet, in his deepest agony, he tilted his head upward as if pleading with the heavens for an unseen miracle. But no such miracle arrived. Instead, from the shadows of the forest, danger emerged. A grizzly bear, drawn by the faint scent of weakness, padded silently toward him. The massive predator exuded raw power, its thick fur rippling with each deliberate step. Dust, too weak to run and too frail to fight, lowered his head as though accepting his fate. The bear's eyes gleamed with hunger, its claws digging into the damp earth as it prepared to lunge. Just as the predator crouched to strike, a piercing voice shattered the forest's eerie silence. "Get away from him!" The grizzly hesitated, its ears flicking toward the sound. From the trees emerged a petite figure with fierce determination etched into her features. "Clara!" She raised her arms high, yelling once more to assert her dominance. The bear growled, torn between its instincts and the challenge Clara posed. Dust's glazed eyes flickered toward her voice. It was faint, but a sliver of recognition broke through his pain. Clara's heart sank as she saw the state of him, the proud Mustang she had once known reduced to skin and bones, tethered cruelly to a tree like discarded trash. Clara's movements were calculated, her resolve unwavering. She took a cautious step forward, shouting once more, her voice cutting through the tension in the air. The bear gave a final, guttural growl before retreating into the shadows. Once sure the threat was gone, Clara rushed to Dust's side. The sight of the heavy chains biting into his skin filled her with rage and heartbreak. Her hands trembled as she knelt beside him. "Oh, Dust," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. With steady fingers, she worked to release the cruel restraints. Dust didn't flinch or struggle, his energy completely drained. When the chains finally fell away, Clara gently stroked his mane, murmuring words of comfort. "I've got you now. You're safe with me." Though his body was weak, Dust mustered the faintest response, a soft nuzzle against her hand. Clara's eyes brimmed with tears as she recognized the trust still lingering in his gaze. But she knew the battle wasn't over. Dust needed immediate care, and the nearest veterinary clinic was miles away. Clara glanced at the forest path ahead, now cloaked in deepening shadows. The journey would be grueling, but she refused to give up. With every ounce of strength, Clara urged Dust to his feet. He stumbled, his legs buckling beneath him, but Clara steadied him with gentle encouragement. She looped a sturdy rope around his neck, offering a guiding hand. "One step at a time, Dust. We'll get through this together." The forest, once serene and inviting, now loomed. The forest, once serene and inviting, now felt like a maze of looming shadows and hidden dangers. Clara moved carefully, each step deliberate as she led Dust through the narrow, uneven trail. The thick canopy of trees above allowed only slivers of moonlight to guide their way, casting eerie patterns on the forest floor. Dust stumbled again, his legs trembling with the effort to stay upright. Clara crouched beside him, her hand gently resting on his shoulder. "I know you're tired," she whispered, her voice soft yet resolute. "But we're almost there. You're stronger than this. Just a little more, Dust." The Mustang snorted faintly, lifting his head just enough to meet her gaze. It was a small gesture, but it reignited Clara's determination. She adjusted the rope around his neck, giving it a gentle tug as they pressed forward. The forest had grown unervingly silent. No chirping birds or rustling leaves. The stillness weighed heavily on Clara, each sound of Dust's labored steps echoing in the void. The air was thick with tension, as though the wilderness itself was watching, waiting. As hours dragged on, Clara felt exhaustion creeping into her own limbs. Her muscles burned, her breath quickened, but she pushed herself to keep moving. Dust needed her strength now more than ever. The memory of his frail body chained to that tree flashed in her mind, fueling her resolve. Then, through the dense trees ahead, a faint light appeared, a beacon of hope piercing the darkness. Clara's heart leapt. A small cabin stood in the distance, its warm glow a promise of safety. Beyond it lay the veterinary clinic, their final destination. "Look, Dust," Clara said, her voice trembling with relief. "We're almost there." But as they drew closer, Dust faltered. His legs buckled beneath him, sending him crashing to the ground. Clara dropped to her knees beside him, panic clawing at her chest. "No, no, no," she murmured, stroking his mane. "You can't give up now. We're so close." Dust's breaths came shallow and uneven, his once bright eyes dull with exhaustion. Clara pressed her forehead against his, her voice breaking. "You fought so hard. Just a little further, Dust. Please." Summoning her last reserves of strength, Clara wrapped her arms around Dust's neck, whispering words of encouragement. Slowly, shakily, the Mustang pushed himself upright. His legs trembled, but he stood. Clara rose alongside him, tears streaming down her face as she guided him toward the cabin. The light grew brighter, illuminating the clearing ahead. Clara could hear footsteps now, quick and purposeful. The cabin door swung open, revealing a tall older man with graying hair. His concerned gaze swept over them, taking in Dust's weakened state. "Is he all right?" the man asked, his voice gruff but filled with urgency. Clara's voice wavered as she replied, I don't know. Please, help him." Without hesitation, the man stepped aside, ushering them into the cabin. The faint smell of antiseptic and hay filled the air. The man, who Clara realized must be the veterinarian, immediately went to work examining Dust with practiced hands. Clara stood back, her heart pounding as she watched. Dust's breathing was shallow, his body trembling with fatigue. She whispered his name, her hands clasped tightly in silent prayer. "Hang in there, Dust. You're going to make it." For what felt like hours, the vet worked in silence, his brow furrowed in concentration. Finally, he stepped back, wiping his hands on a cloth. His expression was serious but not devoid of hope. "He's severely malnourished and dehydrated," the vet said, his voice steady. "But the good news is there's no major organ damage. With the right care, he can recover." Clara let out a shaky breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Relief washed over her, leaving her weak with gratitude. "You're sure?" she asked, her voice trembling. The vet nodded. "It won't be easy, but he's a fighter. He's been through a lot, but he's still holding on." Clara turned to Dust, her eyes brimming with tears. His eyes, though heavy with exhaustion, met hers. In that moment, she felt the unspoken bond between them strengthen, a connection forged through pain, hope, and resilience. For the next several days, Clara stayed by Dust's side. The veterinary clinic became their sanctuary, a place of healing and renewal. She was there for every feeding, every small sign of progress. She whispered words of encouragement, stroked his mane, and reminded him that he wasn't alone anymore. Slowly but surely, Dust began to heal. His legs, once shaky and unsteady, grew stronger. His coat, dull and lifeless when she first found him, regained its glossy sheen. And his eyes, once filled with fear and pain, began to shine with a spark of life. But Clara knew their journey was far from over. The scars of Dust's past ran deep, both physically and emotionally. It would take time, patience, and unwavering love to help him fully heal. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Clara stood beside Dust in a small paddock behind the clinic. He stood taller now, his posture more confident. As she watched him take a few steady steps on his own, her heart swelled with pride. "You're doing it, Dust," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You're going to be okay." Dust turned his head toward her, his dark eyes soft and filled with trust. In that moment, Clara knew their journey together had only just begun. The days at the clinic turned into weeks, each one bringing small yet significant victories for Dust. Clara woke up early every morning, her first thoughts always about the Mustang she had come to see as more than just a rescue. She watched over him with unwavering dedication, ensuring he had everything he needed to recover. The clinic had transformed into more than a temporary refuge. It was now a home for both Clara and Dust. Every day, Clara marveled at the changes in him. His steps became stronger, his posture more confident, and his spirit began to shine through the cracks of his past pain. Dust's coat, once matted and dull, now gleamed under the sunlight. His mane flowed in the breeze as he grazed in the paddock, and his dark eyes reflected a spark of life that had been absent for so long. Clara felt an immense sense of pride watching him thrive, but she knew that true healing wasn't just physical. The emotional scars Dust carried from his abandonment would take time to mend. Clara spent her days talking to him softly, brushing his mane, and simply being present. She could see the trust building between them. The way Dust's once guarded demeanor softened each time she approached. It was a bond forged through struggle, and it grew stronger with every passing moment. But even as Dust flourished, Clara knew she couldn't keep him at the clinic forever. He needed a place where he could roam freely, surrounded by other horses, far away from the cruelty he had endured. She began researching sanctuaries, calling every rescue center she could find, but the answers were always the same: no room, no resources. The thought of sending Dust anywhere less than perfect was unbearable. Clara couldn't imagine him in a place where he wouldn't receive the love and care he deserved. But the reality of the situation weighed heavily on her. Dust couldn't stay at the clinic indefinitely, and Clara couldn't keep him herself. One evening, as the sun dipped below the mountains, Clara sat on the edge of Dust's stall, watching him graze peacefully. The golden light bathed the paddock, creating a serene atmosphere. Dust's progress was undeniable, but the question of his future loomed over her. She sighed, brushing a hand through her hair. "What are we going to do, Dust?" she whispered, her voice laced with worry. Dust looked up from his grazing, his eyes meeting hers with a quiet understanding. The next morning, Clara was startled by the sound of a truck pulling up to the clinic. She stepped outside to see Jackson, the veterinarian, climbing out of the driver's seat. He carried a box of supplies and a thoughtful expression. "I've been thinking about your situation with Dust," Jackson said, setting the box down. "I might have a solution." Clara's heart leapt. "What do you mean?" "There's a sanctuary a few hours from here," Jackson explained. "It's not a fancy place, but they specialize in horses like Dust, rescues with difficult pasts. I've spoken to the owners, and they're willing to take him in." Clara's chest tightened with emotion. This was the news she had been praying for, but it was bittersweet. She wanted what was best for Dust, and she knew the sanctuary was the right choice. But the thought of letting him go was almost too much to bear. "Are you sure it's the right place for him?" Clara asked, her voice trembling. Jackson nodded. "They've got the space, the experience, and the heart for this. He'll be with other horses, and he'll get the care he needs." Clara felt tears welling in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for helping him." Jackson placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "It's what we do. And Clara, you've done more for that horse than anyone else ever could. He's alive because of you." The following day, Clara prepared Dust for the journey to his new home. The morning sun cast a golden glow over the paddock as she gently brushed his mane, speaking softly to him. Dust stood calmly, his trust in Clara evident in the way he leaned into her touch. When the trailer arrived, Clara led Dust toward it with a mixture of pride and heartache. His once frail body now carried a quiet strength, his coat shimmering in the sunlight. As the trailer door closed, Clara's chest tightened. "You're going to be okay, Dust," she whispered, her voice breaking. "This is your chance to start over." The truck rumbled to life, and Clara watched as it disappeared down the road. Tears streamed down her face, but her heart was full. Dust was on his way to a new life, one filled with hope, freedom, and the love he had always deserved. Months passed, and Clara visited the sanctuary whenever she could. Each time, she saw the remarkable transformation Dust had undergone. He galloped freely across the fields, his mane flowing and his hooves thundering against the earth. The Mustang who had once been broken was now a symbol of resilience and strength. But Clara knew Dust's journey wasn't just about recovery, it was about redemption. He had found a place where he could heal, not just physically but emotionally. And in doing so, he had given Clara something she hadn't realized she needed, a sense of purpose and a renewed faith in the power of love and perseverance. Dust's transformation at the sanctuary was nothing short of extraordinary. His once timid steps became confident strides, and the glimmer in his eyes reflected a newfound freedom. Clara visited him often, always marveling at the way he had thrived in his new environment. The sanctuary, nestled in a picturesque valley, was a haven for horses like Dust, creatures who had endured unimaginable hardships and had been given a second chance. Dust roamed the open pastures, his mane billowing in the wind as he ran with a herd of other rescued Mustangs. Clara would stand by the fence, watching him with a mixture of pride and longing. "Look at him," Jackson said one afternoon, joining Clara at the fence. You'd never know he went through so much. Clara nodded, her heart swelling with emotion. He's incredible. He's everything I hoped he could be. But even as Dust thrived, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that their story wasn't over. She had poured her heart into his recovery, and the bond they shared was unbreakable. Every time Dust ran to greet her, nuzzling her hand with his soft muzzle, it was a reminder of how far they had come together. Then one day, Clara received an unexpected call from Jackson. "There's something you should know," he began, his voice heavy with concern. "We've been contacted by someone claiming to be Dust's original owner." Clara's stomach dropped. "What? Why now? What does he want?" Jackson hesitated before answering. "He says he wants to make amends, to take Dust back." "But I don't trust him, Clara. From what I've gathered, this man isn't someone who has Dust's best interests at heart." Clara's mind raced. The thought of Dust being taken away, back to the man who had abandoned him, was unbearable. She knew she had to protect him, no matter what. "I want to meet him," Clara said firmly. "I need to understand his intentions. But Dust isn't going anywhere without a fight." Jackson agreed, and together they arranged to meet the man at a neutral location near the sanctuary. Clara spent the night before the meeting restless, her thoughts consumed by worry. She couldn't imagine Dust being taken away from the life he had fought so hard to rebuild. The next day, Clara and Jackson drove to the meeting spot, a run-down barn on the outskirts of town. The setting did little to ease Clara's apprehension. As they approached, a man in his mid-40s stepped out of the barn, his rough demeanor and cold eyes immediately setting Clara on edge. "You must be Clara," the man said gruffly. "I'm Tom, Dust's rightful owner." Clara's fists clenched at his words, but she kept her voice steady. "I've been caring for Dust for months now. He's happy, healthy, and safe. Why are you coming back now?" Tom shrugged, lighting a cigarette. "I've been thinking about him. Figured I'd try to make things right." Clara narrowed her eyes. "Make things right? You abandoned him to die in the wilderness. You don't deserve him." Tom's expression hardened. "You don't understand. I had my reasons. He wasn't good enough for the ranch, couldn't keep up with the work." Clara felt anger bubbling inside her, but she refused to back down. "That's not an excuse. Dust isn't a tool to be discarded when he doesn't meet your standards. He's a living, breathing being, and he deserves better than you." For a moment, Tom seemed taken aback. He looked away, his cigarette dangling between his fingers. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer, tinged with something resembling regret. "You're right," he admitted. "I screwed up. I wasn't ready for him. I thought he wouldn't survive out there. But if he's doing better with you, maybe it's for the best." Clara's chest tightened. She had come prepared for a fight, but she hadn't expected this. "Dust is thriving now," she said. "He's found a home where he's loved and cared for. He's not going back to you." Tom nodded slowly, the weight of his mistakes evident in his posture. "Take care of him," he said quietly. "He deserves that much." Clara watched as Tom walked back into the barn, disappearing into the shadows. She turned to Jackson, her heart still racing. "Do you think he meant it?" she asked. Jackson sighed. "I don't know. But what matters is that Dust is safe. And you made sure of that." As they drove back to the sanctuary, Clara felt a sense of relief wash over her. Dust's future was secure, and she knew she had done everything in her power to protect him. Over the following weeks, Dust continued to thrive. His coat gleamed under the sun, his steps were strong and steady, and his spirit was unbroken. Clara spent as much time with him as she could, cherishing every moment they shared. One sunny afternoon, Clara stood by the pasture fence, watching Dust gallop freely across the field. His mane flowed like a banner of freedom, and his hooves pounded the earth in a rhythm that spoke of resilience and triumph. Jackson approached, a small smile on his face. "You've done something incredible with him," he said. Clara turned to him, her eyes soft. "He did it. He healed himself. All I did was give him the chance to trust again." Jackson nodded. Sometimes, that's all they need, someone to believe in them. As the sun began to set, Clara walked out to where Dust stood. She reached out, brushing her fingers against his muzzle. He nuzzled her gently, his eyes filled with trust and gratitude. You showed me what real strength is, Clara whispered. Thank you, Dust. In that moment, Clara knew that their journey wasn't just about survival. It was about healing, redemption, and the unbreakable bond between a woman and a Mustang. As Clara stood with Dust in the glowing light of the setting sun, she reflected on the incredible journey they had shared. Dust had gone from a broken, abandoned Mustang to a symbol of resilience and freedom. His transformation was a testament to the strength of the spirit and the power of compassion. Over the next few months, Dust's recovery continued to inspire everyone at the sanctuary. Visitors would stop to marvel at him, their eyes lighting up as they heard his story. For many, Dust represented hope, a living reminder that even the most challenging circumstances could be overcome with love and perseverance. Clara often found herself answering questions from visitors who wanted to know how Dust had come so far. She would smile and recount the moment she found him chained in the forest, the fight to save him, and the unbreakable bond they had formed. It wasn't just about saving him, she would say. It was about giving him a chance to be himself, to find his strength again. One day, as Clara was brushing Dust's mane, Jackson approached with a thoughtful expression. You know, he began, we've been getting a lot of interest in Dust's story. People want to know more about him, about what he's been through. Clara looked up, curious. What do you mean? I mean, Jackson continued, maybe it's time to share Dust's story on a bigger scale. We could reach more people, inspire them. And who knows? It might help the sanctuary, too. Clara considered his words. The idea of sharing Dust's journey with the world was both exciting and daunting. She knew how powerful his story was, how it could touch hearts and bring attention to the plight of so many animals like him. Let's do it, she said finally. Let's tell his story. With Jackson's help, Clara began documenting Dust's journey in detail. They took photos and videos of him running in the pasture, interacting with other horses, and showing off his newfound confidence. Clara wrote about the night she found him, the struggles they faced, and the moments that had brought her to tears. The response was overwhelming. As Dust's story spread, people from all over the country reached out to the sanctuary, offering support and sharing their own stories of rescue and recovery. Donations poured in, allowing the sanctuary to expand and help even more animals in need. But for Clara, the most rewarding part was seeing Dust thrive. He had become a beacon of hope, not just for her, but for everyone who learned about him. One evening, as Clara sat by the pasture fence, she watched Dust grazing peacefully under the stars. She felt a deep sense of gratitude for everything they had been through together. You changed my life, Dust, she whispered. You taught me what it means to fight, to believe, and to never give up. Dust lifted his head, his dark eyes meeting hers as if he understood every word. He nickered softly, a sound that filled Clara's heart with warmth. Their journey was far from over, but in that moment, Clara knew they had already achieved something extraordinary. Together, they had found strength in the face of adversity, and their bond would continue to inspire others for years to come. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Thunder Hoofbeats, and share it with someone who believes in the power of resilience and love. Join us for more incredible tales of courage, hope, and the unbreakable bond between humans and Mustangs. See you in the next story.